Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going deep on something pretty controversial.
Yeah, that's a big one.
President Trump is back in the White House, and, well, he wasted no time.
Yep.
He signed a new executive order on diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI, exactly.
It's
It's causing a lot of waves with federal programs and contracts.
big changes.
We're talking big changes. Yeah.
Definitely.
So to break it all down, we've got excerpts from the actual executive order itself.
Straight from the source.
Straight from the horse's mouth, as they say.
And we've got coverage from NBC News Axios.
Some background from the EEOC website, too.
And for a little historical context.
It's going way back.
To the Equal Employment Opportunity Act.
A little blast from the past.
Helps to see the bigger picture, you know?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So today's deep dive is all about cutting through the noise.
Much noise.
Right. We want to figure out what this all actually means.
What's the real impact?
Exactly.
And how does it all fit into the history of civil rights in this country?
It's been a whirlwind.
It really has. The speed of it all is just remarkable.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Like everything's happening so fast.
Yeah.
NBC News reported that agency heads had only 60 days.
60 days.
60 days to shut down all DEI offices and positions.
Wow.
Not just like scale things back.
Full stop.
Yeah, full stop. We're talking layoff notices and everything.
That's a huge shift.
It is.
Yeah.
When you think about how long it took to build these initiatives.
Decades, right. Each administration kind of adding their piece.
Layer by layer.
And
And
God.
essentially, it gets even crazier, though.
Oh, yeah.
NBC also mentioned that federal employees were getting these emails
What kind of emails?
warning them about, like, adverse consequences
Oh, wow.
if they try to, like, hide DEI initiatives.
So it's like they're expecting to find something.
Right. Like they're on a mission.
Interesting. To really grasp what's going on here,
Yeah.
we need to rewind a bit, go back to the basics.
History lesson time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So back in 1965, President Johnson signed Executive Order 17246.
This is a big one, right?
A cornerstone of the Civil Rights Act. It basically said, if you want government contracts,
Got to play by the rules.
you have to provide equal opportunity for people of color and women.
So that was a huge step forward for civil rights.
It was.
But how does it connect to what's happening now?
Well, this executive order laid the groundwork for affirmative action.
Okay.
The idea that we need to actively create opportunities for groups that have faced discrimination.
I see.
And this new executive order,
Trump's.
yes, this new one is in many ways trying to undo all of that.
Wow. Okay. Let's get into the specifics of this new order then.
Let's do it.
Some of the language is
Strong.
strong is one word for it.
Yeah, phrases like dangerous, demeaning, and immoral, race and sex-based preferences.
It's pretty intense.
It's definitely meant to get your attention. And then there are claims that DEI programs actually violate civil rights laws.
It's a bold statement.
It is. So what they're saying is that DEI has gone too far. It's
Right.
become discriminatory against anyone who doesn't fit into these specific identity categories.
So instead of leveling the playing field,
They're saying it's actually tilted the other way,
interesting. They even use the phrase identity-based spoil system.
which is a loaded comparison.
It is. What are they getting at with
Well,
that?
They're basically saying that DEI has created a system where certain groups get preferential treatment.
Just because of their identity.
Exactly. They're arguing that it undermines things like hard work and individual achievement.
So they're framing it as a kind of reverse discrimination,
You could say that. And it's definitely a message that resonates with a lot of people.
especially those who already have concerns about affirmative action.
Exactly. This is likely to reignite that whole debate.
Big time. Okay, so what exactly is this executive order trying to change?
Well, it's revoking several previous executive orders that focused on DEI.
Like which ones?
For example, it revokes President Clinton's executive order on environmental justice,
Okay.
President Obama's order on promoting diversity in the federal workforce,
Mhm.
even the one that expanded protections to include sexual orientation and gender identity.
Wow.
And it goes even further. It revokes Obama's presidential memorandum on diversity and inclusion in national security.
So this isn't just a minor tweak.
Not at all.
It's a complete overhaul.
It is. They're changing the entire approach to diversity and inclusion within the federal government.
And the implications go beyond just the government, right?
Absolutely. The executive order strongly encourages the private sector to end what it calls illegal discrimination and preferences.
And they're specifically calling out DEI initiatives.
They are.
That's interesting because NBC News reported that companies like Meta, McDonald's, Walmart,
Big names.
huge companies, they've already started scaling back their DEI efforts.
Mm-hmm. That's worth noting.
Is that a coincidence? Or are they reacting to this new direction from the White House?
It's hard to say for sure. It could be preemptive compliance.
Getting ahead of the curve.
Exactly.
Right.
Or maybe they're worried about legal challenges.
Nobody wants a lawsuit.
Right. And it's also possible that they genuinely believe in the message of this executive order.
That DEI has gone too far.
Right. It's a complex issue with a lot of different perspectives.
So we need to consider all the angles here.
We do.
Now, you mentioned the OFCCP.
Yes,
This executive order has some very specific instructions for them.
it does.
Could you remind us who they are and how this affects them?
Sure. The OFCCP stands for the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs.
Kitschy.
They're basically the watchdogs for DEI within the federal government.
Okay.
This executive order tells them to stop promoting diversity. They're no longer supposed to hold federal contractors accountable for affirmative action,
Wow.
and they're discouraged from pushing for workforce balancing based on protected categories.
So essentially, they're being told to back off.
In a nutshell, yeah.
And if I'm understanding this correctly, federal contracts are going to have a new clause now,
That's right.
where the company has to swear that they're not promoting DEI in a way that violates civil rights laws.
Exactly. It adds a whole new layer of complexity to doing business with the government.
And it sounds like these changes are already happening.
They are. NBC reported that both the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Education have already removed or archived web pages related to diversity and inclusion.
So this isn't just talk.
Nope. This is action.
It's happening.
It is. It's important to really unpack the language of this executive order.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't hold back when it comes to criticizing DEI programs.
It's pretty harsh.
It argues that DEI has actually become a system of discrimination.
Discrimination?
Yeah, based on race and sex.
Wow.
It says it's the opposite of equal opportunity.
Which is ironic.
Right, because that's what DEI was supposed to be all about.
It's like they're saying that instead of leveling the playing field.
It's created a whole new set of winners and losers.
Based on identity.
Exactly.
And they keep using this phrase, identity-based spoil system.
That's a deliberate choice of words.
It is. What are they trying to say with that?
They're trying to link DEI to this idea of unfair favoritism.
Like the old spoil system.
Exactly.
Right.
Where government jobs were given out as rewards.
Not based on merit.
Right. They're implying that DEI has become a modern version of that.
Where certain groups get an advantage just because of who they are.
You got it. It's a powerful analogy.
It is, and it's going to resonate with people who already have doubts about affirmative action.
Absolutely. This executive order is going to bring that whole debate back to the forefront.
We're going to see legal challenges, protests.
Strong opinions on both sides.
Definitely. So with all of that in mind, where do we go from here?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. What are some of the long-term impacts we should be watching for?
Well, it's hard to predict the future with certainty.
Of course.
But we can look at the potential ripple effects.
Based on what we know so far.
Exactly. Let's start with federal contractors.
Okay.
They're under a lot of scrutiny now.
More than before.
Oh, yeah. They could face penalties if their DEI programs are found to violate this executive order.
So the stakes are higher.
They are. And remember, the order also puts pressure on the private sector to follow suit.
So this could affect businesses that don't even work directly with the government.
That's the idea. Companies might think twice about having strong DEI programs.
Because they're worried about lawsuits or bad press.
Exactly. It could slow down progress on diversity and inclusion across the board.
What about the impact on the federal government itself?
Well, we talked about the DEI offices and positions being eliminated.
Right.
But there's also the bigger cultural shift to consider.
What do you mean?
This executive order sends a clear message.
The DEI is not a priority.
Exactly. And that could make it harder to recruit and retain a diverse workforce.
People might not want to work for the government if they feel like their identities aren't valued.
That's a valid concern.
And
And it could also affect employee morale.
If people feel like they're not being treated fairly,
Right, they might be less engaged in their work.
it could have a ripple effect throughout the entire federal workforce.
And beyond the workforce itself,
What do you mean?
think about how federal agencies interact with the public.
Okay.
If DEI is no longer a guiding principle.
Some groups might feel excluded.
Exactly. They might feel like they're not getting the same level of service or access to programs.
So the implications of this executive order are pretty far-reaching.
They are. It goes beyond just policy changes.
It's about culture and perception.
And it's about the relationship between the government and the people it serves.
This is a lot to unpack.
It is. And it's important to remember that we're still in the early stages.
This is just the beginning.
The executive order lays out the big picture,
But the details are still being worked out.
how it's all going to be implemented in practice.
Right. So we're going to have to keep a close eye on how things unfold.
Absolutely. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
I have a feeling we're going to be talking about this for a long time.
Oh, yeah? This is just the first chapter?
It feels like this executive order is raising some really big questions about the future of DEI.
Yeah, it's a turning point for sure.
Not just in government, but in society as a whole.
It definitely has broader implications.
One thing that keeps coming up for me is this idea of unintended consequences.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Could you talk about that a little more?
Sure. So some people are worried that by getting rid of DEI programs, we might actually make it harder to address those systemic barriers.
The ones that prevent equal opportunity.
Exactly. It's like we're assuming that focusing on individual merit is enough.
But what if the playing field itself is tilted?
That's the key question, right?
Like we could be ignoring those underlying structural issues that put certain groups at a disadvantage.
Think about it this way.
Okay.
Imagine a foot race where some runners have to start further back,
Where they have to jump over hurdles.
right? And the others don't.
So even if you say, may the best person win,
It's not really a fair race.
because they're not starting from the same place.
Exactly. It ignores the fact that the system itself is rigged.
I like that analogy. It's a good way to visualize it.
And it makes you think about whether individual effort is really enough.
Right, because even if you work hard,
You might still be facing obstacles that others don't have to deal with.
and those obstacles can be invisible sometimes.
They can. They're built into the structure of society.
So even with good intentions,
Just focusing on merit might not be enough to create true equality.
there's another concern that's been on my mind.
What's that?
What about affirmative action?
Ah, yes.
If those initiatives get rolled back,
It could lead to less diversity.
especially in places like higher education and government.
That's right. And that could have a ripple effect.
How so?
Well, if the people in those positions aren't representative of the population, it could affect policy decisions and how resources are allocated.
So it could perpetuate the existing inequalities
It could make it harder for underrepresented groups to have their voices heard.
and to have their needs met.
Exactly. It's a complex issue with a lot of potential consequences.
So it sounds like this executive order is a bit of a double-edged sword.
You could say that it's trying to refocus on individual merit.
And eliminate what it sees as discriminatory practices within DEI.
But there's a risk that it could actually make things worse for some people
It could create new barriers to equality.
and make it harder to achieve true fairness.
So where do we go from here?
That's the big question, isn't it?
What can our listener do to make sense of all this?
I think the most important thing is to stay informed.
Okay.
Don't just rely on headlines or sound bites.
Do your own research.
Exactly. Read different perspectives, talk to people who have different views.
Get the whole picture.
Right, and try to understand the nuances of this issue.
It's not black and white.
There are valid arguments on both sides.
And most importantly,
Critically,
about the potential consequences of this shift in policy.
ask yourself, will this really level the playing field?
Or will it create new obstacles to equality and opportunity?
Those are the questions we all need to be asking.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I just want to say thank you for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope this conversation has given you some food for thought.
And some new insights.
We encourage you to keep exploring these issues
Keep learning. Keep asking those tough questions.
because this is an ongoing conversation.
And we all have a role to play in shaping the future of DEI.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.